Welcome to the Mercy Cast, where we are learning the art of compassion through the adversity of life. I am your host, Raleigh Sadler. Caring for others, it can just be so difficult because we are ultimately giving and giving and giving, and sometimes our wells aren't being refilled. It's hard to give out of an empty well, and that can sometimes lead to resentment. We can resent the people that we're caring for. We can look at ourselves and be like, oh, woe is me. Why is this happening? We can look at God and say, you're supposed to be a loving God. Why would you allow this to happen? It can really just send us for a tailspin. But I think there's a certain grace there. We do grow, we do change. But oftentimes we're not looking for the hidden lessons when we're suffering. Maureen's child was diagnosed with cancer at 6 months old. Let that sink in, 6 months. And at this point, years would pass, and Maureen's thinking, we're past it. This was rock bottom, doesn't get any worse. And then out of the blue, her daughter is diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she's 12. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Maureen Michele Petersen. She's an author, a physician, life coach, and most important of all, she's a mom. Her most recent book, Reclaiming Life, A Guide for Parents of Chronically Ill Children, is what we're going to be talking about today. Maureen, welcome to the Mercy Cast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited for this conversation to be able to talk to you about kind of the things that have gone on in my life and give your audience some tips that they can start implementing in their lives today.
Well, yeah, this is good because you are like so many parents. I have so many friends who will reach out and they'll say, hey, could you pray for me? Or could you help me process this? This happened to my kid. I don't know what to do. Or I'm at my wit's end. Or I don't know how we're even going to be able to put food on the table because now we have all these medical bills. You must have felt very overwhelmed when you thought you were out of the woods and then you find out that your daughter has type 1 diabetes. Can you unpack that a little bit for me?
Yeah. And, I'll even go back to when I was a kid. I really had two dreams, the dream of being a mom and the dream of being a doctor. And I was very fortunate, got to accomplish both of those dreams. Like you said, when my daughter was 6 months old, she is my second child. I was a pediatric resident and she was diagnosed with neuroblastoma, which is a type of pediatric cancer. During that time, it felt like that dream that I had as a kid was being stripped away from me. And I focused everything on her and let everything around me kind of fall by the wayside. I didn't have time for myself. I didn't have time for my other child. Like it was tough. And I went into kind of a dark place. With time, things got better the farther that we got away from the diagnosis. When she was 12, I got to be the physician to diagnose her with diabetes. And some folks have said to me, well, it must have been easier because you knew what this diagnosis meant. And I said, no, it wasn't easier. It's not harder either. It's just different. Like being naive sometimes is actually protective. And because I knew what type 1 diabetes meant, my brain was off to the races on anticipating every bad thing that was going to happen. But that experience of going through that cancer journey years earlier, I didn't want to go back to that dark place. So was very proactive in figuring out how do I take care of my own emotional health in this? Because there's no cure for type 1 diabetes, that it's going to change her life forever. It's going to change my life as a mom. It's going to change our lives as a family. So I needed to make sure that I took care of myself to be able to do the best job of parenting her and my other two kids. And that's kind of how I really learned about coaching through podcasts and books and getting my own coach, and eventually became a certified life coach and saw how much it helped patients in the clinic setting. And so now I spend my days helping parents who have chronically ill kids.
It's interesting. You diagnosed your own daughter. Not many parents get to do that, other than if it's like a WebMD kind of thing, which you would probably not advocate for.
Right. This is true.
Every doctor I've ever met, every physician I've ever met, it's like, yeah, just stay away from WebMD. It's like counselors when you go up to them and be like, I just took this little social media quiz that said that I have this or I have that. And they're like,
Yes.
no, don't do that. Give it to
Right.
the professionals. Let the professionals help you. And so it sounds like to me that you diagnosed your own daughter's malady, but you also, in doing that, were able to diagnose that you were going to need help. Like, how are you able to be that self-aware in that moment? Because sometimes when we're focusing on other people, we're not
Right.
thinking about how it impacts us.
Right. Well, and I would say that, to be perfectly honest, it was not in the moment of making the diagnosis that I was like, oh, I need to find myself a coach and figure out how to do this. That I, in the moment, when I diagnosed her with diabetes, it was in a tiny school bathroom. So she had texted me from school that day because she went to a school for the arts and danced hardcore ballet, and said, Mom, you need to bring home whatever you need because I have peed 12 times today at school. So I'm like, she must have a urinary tract infection because we did the cancer stuff years earlier. This couldn't be anything bad. I made the decision to get a urine cup and urine dipstick to take it to her school so that I wouldn't have to go all the way home to figure out, something's really wrong, and take her back to the hospital. So I brought the cup and dipstick to her school. She peed in it. And when I dipped it, we're standing, she and I, in this tiny school bathroom, and the glucose test measurement on the strip went way dark. And there's only one diagnosis that does that, and that's type 1 diabetes. And in this bathroom, I immediately start to cry. And she says, Mom, what's the matter? And I said, well, you have diabetes. And she says, am I going to die? And I said, no, sweetheart, you're not going to die. And now she's crying and doesn't even know why she's crying. She's just seen that I'm upset about this. And she says, well, why are you crying? And I said, well, it's just because I don't want you to have diabetes. And that was the start of our journey with diabetes. And so over the course of the next several days, it's getting her blood sugar under control, getting used to dosing insulin and checking blood sugars and all that kind of stuff. But it was, once the dust settled, it was the realization that this isn't going away, that the cancer part, I was scared, but I knew if we got through the hump of chemo and she was doing okay, and with each follow up continued to do okay, that I could eventually put that diagnosis behind me. But diabetes, it was there to stay and stay forever. So there becomes this process when a child gets diagnosed with something chronic that parents go through, and it's somewhat akin to grieving, that you grieve the loss of this life that you thought you were going to have. and need to work through all of, the denial, the anger, and finally get to this place of acceptance. So there's a range of emotions, and every single emotion is absolutely normal. I want your audience to really hear that. But the after things calm down, it's the realization that we don't need to be led by fear or led by guilt or led by being overwhelmed. That those are emotions that are kind of along for the ride, but they don't need to lead us in our everyday life and consume us. Like, we can still have this beautiful life. It's going to be different than what we imagined, but it's still beautiful.
And you talk about this grieving the loss of your preferred future and realizing that what I thought was going to happen isn't going to happen. And so you have to go through these stages and you're processing grief. You're processing this deep feeling of loss. It's almost like a death that happened. But I love how you say that you don't necessarily have to allow your emotions, your fear, your guilt, whatever you're processing in that moment, to take the driver's seat in such a way that you miss the life that's happening right in front of you.
Right.
I think that is so easy to do when things happen. We just become so solitarily focused on that one thing that we miss the 99 other things that are good. We
Yes.
miss the life that's in front of us, and we miss the moments that we could cherish for the rest of our lives because we're so frustrated that it's just not going the way that we pictured.
Absolutely. And, this is what you just said about that we get so focused on this like challenge or this negative thing that's happening to us, and we miss everything else. This is why gratitude practice really works. And there's great science behind it. I always teach patients and clients that every single day, write down 3 specific things that you are grateful for. And they can't be general things like, I'm grateful for my kids. Yes, am grateful for my kids, but it needs to be specific. Like, I'm grateful for the phone conversation that I had with my daughter. I'm grateful for a steaming hot cup of coffee. They need to be very specific. And by doing that on a regular basis, every single day, whether they're big specific things or even small little specific things, it teaches your brain to have a great filter that you see life through. And so that you are focusing now on the great things in life. The bad stuff is still there, but you're not zeroed in and just have it consume your thoughts. You can deal with the bad stuff too, because you see all of this goodness that's around it.
And it's funny because I feel like this idea of gratitude keeps coming up in our episodes. And one thing I do every day is I write 3 things that I'm thankful for. And I didn't used to do this, but it's this lens of gratitude that helps me process everything else. If I'm coming at it not from a place of scarcity where I'm worried about, is this going to be taken away? Or, that's just this, it can be a very negative mindset. But if I'm coming at it from this place of surplus where I'm thankful for what I have. Well, that helps me handle the negative things in a different way. That helps me be a little bit more patient, a little bit more loving, a little bit more gracious, not only to others, but to myself. And yeah, I love how you brought that up because having someone write down 3 things that you're grateful for, and especially as you do this at the start of your day, you can do it at any point whenever you get a moment. But it really serves as a North Star because now we're living out of thanks. And now we're realizing that, yeah, things may be tough right now, but there are things to celebrate. I've had friends that they'll celebrate all these little things. And that wasn't, I didn't grow up with that. And so being around people that celebrate every little thing, it can be so interesting. It feels weird, but it can be so interesting because these people are thankful. And they're like, man, I'm so glad that we had this meal. I remember sitting down with this pastor once, and there was a bunch of us, and he said, you guys don't know how to pray for your meals. He's like, you're over here having this long devotion. The whole point is to be thankful. And it shifted everything for me because you're talking about everything else but being thankful. And that's the whole point of it. And we can be thankful for our meals. But there are so many things that we can be thankful for. And when we operate out of gratitude, you're right. It's going to transform everything we do. And I'm sure you probably learned that the hard way, didn't you?
Definitely learned it the hard way. And, just to kind of go back to something that you said at the beginning, just the conversation we're having, like, applies to anyone because life is full of challenges, whether it's a kid's chronic illness or whether it's a financial situation or whether it's a career or work issue. There's always challenges in life. I always teach folks, though, that challenges come in life and we really have two choices. We can either crumple up into a ball and pretend that it's all just going to go away and allow life to happen to us, or we can choose to believe that that challenge is really a gift and allow life to happen for us so that we are learning from whatever challenge is in front of us. And in the moment, it's really hard to think of a challenge as a gift. But if you have that belief throughout your life that whatever comes at me, it's going to be hard, but I will eventually figure out how it is a gift. If you have that belief, it makes it so much easier to go through a challenge.
That's a welcome thought for me. Last year, I did something called the Camino de Santiago. It's a pilgrimage. And on the Camino, one thing that people will always say is one of the things you have to do as you're being present on this walk is accept both good and bad as gifts. And it's such a different way to think, but the Camino, all it is a little life. It is anywhere from a 13-day to a 34-day life cycle. And so it helps us live life moving forward. And I think in our regular lives, our day-to-day lives, if we are able to accept what comes as a gift, even if at the moment we're like, oh, this is a gift I'd like to exchange. This is a gift I'm gonna put in a closet and give it out at the White Elephant Gift later this Christmas. But it is a gift. And I love how you talk about we can view life as happening to us where we're the victim.
Right.
It's just happening to me. Or looking at it slightly differently, life can happen for us. And even if this is bad, it's shaping us. It's charting a new path. And that doesn't have to mean that it's going to always be how it feels right now. I mean, you're not advocating this Pollyanna approach where we're just like, everything is great.
Yeah, absolutely not. And, it even gets to another question of what do we really want out of life? And when I ask some folks that, they'll say, I just want to be happy. And I'll tell them, you know what? I can tell you that's not what you really want from life. Because if life was all just roses and unicorns and we knew nothing else and we were just happy all the time, it'd be so incredibly boring because we wouldn't understand the two ends of the spectrum. So having these challenges mixed in with these great blessings is the way life is supposed to be. And it allows us to really grow as a person and to be able to help others grow through this journey too, right? So, like, through my experience, not only was I able to become a better mom, a better doctor, a better person, but I got to teach my kids how to be resilient, how to advocate for themselves, how to be organized, how to really have dreams that they go out and chase, but also how to respond to challenges when they come around. And being able to do that is, I will forever be grateful that I've been given these big challenges in life to really test my strength and be able to allow me to grow.
It's caring for others. So many times we just think that as we're caring for others, we're just giving and we're giving and we're giving. But it does cause us to look at ourselves. It's almost like as you're caring for someone else, that's like a mirror for our own health. And I love how you're allowing what happened to your daughter to be something that happened not only for your daughter, but for you, for your family. And it's changing your whole perspective of how you care for your daughter, how you care for your family, but also how you care for you. Because I think that even this perspective is an act of self-care. It's an act of loving yourself, providing for yourself, and seeing life as a burrito of sorts. You know, it's got a
Yeah,
lot of things in there that probably you wouldn't picture would go together, but when they go together, it feels whole. And I think we're so used to viewing our lives in this dichotomy of good or bad
right.
rather than, yeah, there are good parts, there are bad
Yeah,
parts. But that's the beauty of life, that even the bad things can sometimes be a gift, and the challenges and the blessings, that's the way it's supposed to be.
right. And understanding that, like, makes individuals who are going through hard times understand they're not alone, that it can become very isolating when you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm the only person on this earth that is having all these bad things happen to me. Like, why me? Why me? And the understanding that it's really happening to everybody because this is the way that life really truly is. But, I want to also mention just about a little bit more about self-care and how, like, this perspective, like, changed and had me really understand self-care and growth and that sort of thing. Because self-care gets talked about, I think, a lot now. And when people hear us mention the word self-care, they're thinking days at the spa or vacations or that
Right,
sort of thing.
right, right.
And you know what? I love me a good spa day, but that is not what I'm talking about. And it is really like setting aside a few moments of your day to do something to allow you to stay emotionally healthy. For me, that's journaling, it's meditating, it's exercising. And those three things are non negotiable in my day. It's important for me to do it, just as important as anything that I do. Or if I was on an antidepressant medicine, it would be just as important as taking that antidepressant. Like, we have to do something as caregivers to keep our cup full so that we're able to continue to do a good job of caring for our kids or our family members or our friends, whoever we're caring for.
Well, and you bring up this idea of emotional health, that it's important for us to pay attention to that. And you're right. I feel like people talk about self care in a way that almost puts people off now, because some people will be like, well, self care is selfishness. And I'm like, it can be. But I also think that our emotional health is important. And I think it's important that we describe, what do you mean by emotional health?
Emotional health is really understanding how you feel and processing those emotions. And I'll even take it a step further. One of the things that I teach patients and clients is that our mind gives us tons of thoughts in a day. Some we don't even pay attention to, and some are necessary, like get a drink of water. But some are just noise that are creating stories in our mind. All thoughts, though, can lead to emotion. Emotions can lead to how we act in life, and our actions are giving us the results that we see. So, taking care of our mind and being aware of our thoughts is really important for understanding and feeling our emotions so that we're able to process them and create the actions in our lives that really give us the results that we want and be able to achieve the dreams or goals that we've set out for ourselves.
And I would assume that you've experienced this, but as we care for people, it can be very easy to experience. You talk about the emotions of fear, guilt, resentment. How do we even recognize that we're experiencing those?
Super hard in the moment if you don't practice this, because understanding and being able to label emotions and just have a vocabulary of various emotions is really the first step in all of this. And
Mm.
we're oftentimes brought up to where we're not supposed to show emotion, whether that be we're not supposed to be afraid as a kid, or we're not supposed to cry as an adult. And the labeling emotions is the very first thing. In the moment, unless you practice it on a regular basis, you're not going to be able to label an emotion right when it's happening. It's really reflecting on it after the fact through things like journaling that you then better understand what emotions were present. So then, with more and more reflection and more practice, you get quicker and better and more specific in the moment.
So it's this practice of becoming more self aware with
Yeah.
our emotions.
Yeah. And is self-aware to the point where not only are you labeling, but you're describing. And what I mean by that is if I say I'm scared, well, how does that feel in my body? Is my pulse rising? Is my face getting flushed? Do I feel my head pounding? All of these physical symptoms are the result of an emotion. And so really being aware, labeling that emotion and being aware of what changes are going on in your body can be very helpful with processing them and getting better at recognizing them when they come on.
Well, and that's got to be half of the battle, right? You're no longer feeling overwhelmed per se because you don't know what's happening. Now, okay, this is what I'm experiencing.
Right. Yeah.
That's okay. There's an objective reality that I have been here before. And so now I know what to do. And so
Right.
you're able to guide yourself through it rather than just get stuck. Because I feel like that's where a lot of us get. We get stuck. And then we're like, okay, I don't really know what to do here. I don't know how to respond. But when it's no
Right.
longer this boogeyman lurking in
Right.
the corner and you're named it, you've categorized it, you know what to do with it, it seems like there's a way forward there.
Yeah. And the other like really simple trick. So a very common emotion, especially when you're dealing with kids who have chronic illness, is being overwhelmed. And when a parent gets stressed and overwhelmed, they go into this fight or flight mode, right? Well, when your body is in fight or flight, it is narrowing the focus. And that's purposeful, because if you were really had an enemy that was trying to attack you, you want to narrow focus to escape and go on your way. But being overwhelmed and stressed, like your focus narrows, your heart rate's up, you can't concentrate, you're a mess because all your body's telling you to do is get out of there. And this is where just pausing and taking some breaths relaxes your nervous system to get your pulse back down to where you can stop all of this surge of hormones that is causing this physical state of overwhelm. And it can help with processing what's really the root cause of pushing you to being overwhelmed and stressed in that moment.
Yeah, dealing with that root cause. Because I think when someone else needs us and we're supposed to care for them, but we're just feeling depleted, it's easy to blame too, right? We can do this blame shifting thing where we blame other people for things that are actually like we're experiencing them, but they're happening because there are parts of our lives that we've allowed to be untended, whether they have been untended by others, untended by ourselves, but we're not getting what we need to be the best versions of ourselves in that moment. And I'm not saying we need to avoid messing up. No, that's part of the beauty of life. You mess up, you apologize, you heal, you grow, you move forward. Sometimes you move forward by looking backwards. Whatever you do, that's just part of it. But I think what you're saying, and I love that we're talking about this, is as we're tending to others, we've got to tend to ourselves. And I think this is important. But again, how do we maintain this perspective? How do we maintain that it's okay to not be okay while I'm caring for someone else who's not okay?
I'm going to add first to something that you said, and you were talking about blame. I would even say there's two things that really stand out that cause caregivers that are in the middle of challenges to really get stuck. And that is blame and shame. And, you had touched on the fact too that like we're going to make mistakes. We should apologize. I would even say that mistakes are okay in life. Like
Right.
they're as important as winning in life. Because if we were always winning, we'd never push ourselves to be able to figure out, okay, where's the boundary on what I can do or how I can grow. And so trying something new, yeah, maybe you're going to make a mistake from it, but all a mistake is that it'll shift your route on getting to what you want to achieve, and you do it differently. It's just data. And so it's super important to take away this guilt and shame for making mistakes. They're important. And as someone who's a scientist, it's just data. But your question was, well, where do you start? And I tell folks, I go back to journaling again. You really have to start with consciousness and understanding what thoughts are going on in your mind to be able to get to that kind of root cause. Because I described thoughts go to feelings, feelings go to actions, actions go to the results. Well, if we master the feelings piece, we need to even back it up a step further and master that thought piece to be able to really look at our thoughts in an objective way on, is this a story that I've just made up and I'm not even sure it's true. Is this a thought that helps me, or is this a thought that is not serving me at all? And I need to switch this belief because it's limiting me. So
Yeah.
understanding your mind is really, really the root of it all.
You talk about this idea that it's just data. Well, that's freeing because, like I said earlier, when I was talking about how we view things through the good and bad dichotomy, we're either all good or all bad. And we can't see ourselves as just humans
Yeah,
who sometimes we're just failing and flailing. I mean, that's life. That doesn't mean that we're not culpable. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't apologize.
right,
But when you view it as it's just data, yes, this is what we've gathered. This is what reality is right now. And that's okay. What
right,
happened, happened. So what do we want to do with our next steps based on the data that we've received? I
right.
mean, it's kind of like honestly stripping it of its emotional weight and just looking at it as this happened. That's okay. What's next?
Right. And what did I learn from it? Because that's the important thing. Whether it's a win or a loss, you should always be looking at what did I learn from it? If you made a mistake and you made somebody upset, for example, absolutely apologize, but reflecting back on how can I do it differently next time is the important thing to take away from that kind of trial and error of life.
And I think when we do that, it brings us face to face with our limiting beliefs. And I love that you brought those up because there are agreements that we've made. There are things that we have accepted as gospel, just to be honest, about ourselves that aren't true. It may be reflecting the voice of someone who was negative in our life. It may be reflecting our own voice, but we believe these things and we just think, oh, well, that's just how it is. How do we recognize these self-limiting beliefs? Because they've got to overflow into how we care for others. And so how do we recognize them? And then what do we do about that?
Yeah. And so I think this is the third time that I've said this. So hopefully your audience gets it. Like it goes back to journaling. And so oftentimes people say to me, I don't know what to start. Like, how do I start journaling? I don't have a prompt. Like, where do I find prompts? Look, all you need is a blank sheet of paper and a writing utensil. Whatever thoughts are going on in your mind is what gets written down on your piece of paper. I have folks who I work with who throw the paper away at the end. I have folks who keep it as a notebook. But after you're done with that kind of brain dump, that it allows you to become more objective about what was on your mind and really looking at those words that once was in your head that's now on the paper allows you to become more curious about them, to figure out, do I see a pattern that's coming up where this thought keeps coming up over and over again? And maybe why do I believe that? Is it really helping me if I believe this? But writing it down is the first step, because if it's just floating around in your mind, it's hard to capture. The first time somebody sits down to journal, I give them the instructions of do not worry about it not making sense, because it oftentimes won't. It is just free flowing, and allowing your brain space to put those thoughts on paper is really important.
And I love that. Like journaling, and we have talked about that a lot in this episode. But what's funny is it keeps coming up. And the most recent episodes, everyone keeps talking about this idea of like, we should journal, put it down. Even if you don't know what you're saying, put it down because you're right. In a sense, you're capturing it. And in the Bible, there's this idea of taking our thoughts captive. And I think when we write it, we're putting it somewhere. So we don't have to hold it up here all the time. We can know that it's somewhere. And I had a friend of mine who said, I would write out all my emotions, write out everything I was experiencing, put it in a journal, and then put it in my bedside table. And so I knew where it was. So I was able to focus on other things, but I put it down and I was able to be like, well, that was dealt with. And I think there's some other therapeutic ways of handling it. Some people do things that are symbolic, like they'll write something down that's been haunting them and then they'll bury it or they'll burn it or really whatever works for people. These symbolic things can work. But I think it's important. I love how you said that, to write it down, because just the process of writing almost forces us to accept it, because now it's in front of us. Now we see it. It's not only playing on repeat in our mind. Now we're seeing it with our own eyes. And that gives us a different perspective.
And we become a little more distant from it. So we're more objective. But that's the trick, though, with journaling, is you cannot judge what's coming out of your head and onto the paper. That's not allowed. That is the rule. You have to write it down, just write it down without any judgment, so that you then can distance yourself and really do the work to figure out if it really belongs in your head or not.
You've given us so many things to think about as we care for others, and really how we're caring for ourselves as we're caring for others. But how would you, in these last couple of moments, how would you encourage those who are listening to look at themselves as they're facing what just feels like an impossible situation?
I would say if they're looking at their life and feel like there's some big challenge and it feels impossible, I want them to hear that it's going to be okay and life can still be beautiful. But the first step is recognizing, you know what? I want something different out of this life. I don't know how to get there on my own, so I need help with it. And that's asking for help from a family member or a friend or a coach or a therapist. There's so many people in this world that can offer assistance, but taking that first step to recognize that they want change and asking for help with making the change is really important.
Dr. Petersen, thank you so much for being on this episode. This is so good because I think on our best day, we're wounded healers, and some of us are close to succumbing to our wounds. And so you've really given us really good things to think about. So thanks for being on.
No, thank you for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation.
If you are interested in more stories like this one, buy my book, Vulnerable: Rethinking Human Trafficking. Also, if you want bonus content, you can click on the link in the show notes to access our new and improved weekly bonus podcast, More Mercy, where I dive deeper into each episode. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave MercyCast a 5-star review. I want to hear from you. You can email me at info@mercycast.com. This podcast is brought to you by Let My People Go. To learn more about how you can love your most vulnerable neighbors through your own vulnerability, go to lmpg.org. Till next time, have mercy on yourselves and each other.